morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters Office Hours, where we take a look at all things workplace wellbeing. An interesting thing that's been happening in the UK recently is one of our politicians has come out and said mental ill health is being overdiagnosed. Now, that's not what this show is going to be about. What I wanted to talk about, because I think if you have a diagnosis and it's been done following the proper channels, you have a diagnosis. The problem comes when you're self-diagnosing. Because as we know from so many shows that we've had with all the guest experts that we are lucky to bring on this show, we know that diagnoses can be very difficult to come by, and also they need to follow a certain procedure to make sure that you are being treated for the right thing. And in today's show, that's one of the areas that we're going to be discussing with our guest, Rob Stevens. He's from Optix Solutions. He came on a show previously where we talked about how to encourage getting the best performance out of Gen Z. And he's come on again today to look at this particular issue. Let's head over to the main studio. Rob, welcome to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. It's always a pleasure to have you on set.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Oh, you're so welcome, because it was such a fascinating discussion last time about Gen Z and how to get them more engaged in the workplace. But we wanted to talk or start talking about quite a problematic issue at the moment, which is this self-diagnosing of mental health issues that seems to be quite a thing amongst the younger workforce. Do you want to sort of expand on your experience of this?
So I think the self-diagnosis sort of phenomenon is very prevalent within the Gen Z population, and particularly those who are employed. But I'm also sort of mindful that I don't want to come across as sort of a whinging old boomer who's sort of just having a pop here, because somebody who's kind of pointed that out, and I'm coming at this from a position of care, really, where I am concerned. I think it needs to be spoken about, and I haven't sort of got solutions today, but I thought at least we could kind of raise awareness and then explore potential avenues to look at where people can hopefully find the right support for their needs. Yes,
I think you're absolutely right, and I understand and I get it. We worry about coming across exactly the same way, but then the whole problem with self-diagnosis is you may not get the support you need. But I understand why people are doing it, because you haven't got the access to the services who are going to diagnose you. So there is an issue there, which kind of brings me on to the first point here. Now, whilst organisations are getting more aware of mental health needs, there is an issue where Gen Z, actually sometimes the whole workforce, are not taking up the opportunities and options that are available. So this is what Statista says. Research indicates that although mental health support is increasingly available, it remains underutilised by Gen Z employees. For example, those experiencing stress or anxiety. Out of those, only 46% have used an employee assistance programme, and only 49%, so just under half, have accessed the mental health apps. And this underutilisation persists despite Gen Z or Gen Z in particular having a strong stance on the importance of mental health. So what do you think is causing this underutilisation? Because workplaces are getting better at providing.
Yeah. So I think that the particularly over, say, the last 5 years or so, workplaces have amped up their employee support programs, and they've had to, right? I guess, if you want to attract the best sort of talent out there, if you want to keep the best talent, then you have to sort of look after them, and you have to provide the right level of support. I think the challenge, though, comes that even though the support's available, it isn't being accessed, and that's across the whole board, right? But I think what was startling when I looked at this was that the prevalence of Gen Z to engage with support programs is about half of the rest of the working population, right? So less than half as likely to engage with the support programs. And yet, I think conversely, they're more than twice as likely to be self-diagnosing with some form of a mental health issue. So therein lies sort of the catch-22. You've got a population in that Gen Z space who are twice as likely to be self-diagnosing, but half as likely to actually engage with professional support. And I don't know why that is, but that's not just one data set that I've looked at. I think, going all the way from HR Review to Forbes, to, I think, the Harvard Business Review, there's some really kind of big institutions, international institutions, looking at this phenomenon and trying to understand why it's happening. And nobody quite knows yet, but it is happening. So
it's quite puzzling, isn't it? You'd think that one would mean the other would happen. If they're more aware of what might be going on, they might be more aware of what help is out there. But so you've said that in your own experience that reaching out is the best course of action. How would we encourage our teams to make use of the support and the help that's out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that we would do is to try and lead from the top. Okay, so in terms of your own actions, have you as a leader or a manager of people engaged with those services yourself? Do you know how to kind of interact with them? Have you actually gone through with the program? You may not be suffering from any kind of mental health program, but you should at least try and access them to understand, is it just a phone call? Can you just press a button on an app? And what are the queues like? Can you get straight through to somebody, or do you have to wait a few days or weeks or months? Or is it literally, if you have a private healthcare program, you might get access to support, within a few moments. So I think there's, first of all, it's about leading through, your own behaviours. And secondly, it's everybody's different, right? So, one person might feel very comfortable with an online support app. Another individual may absolutely not and want, a more personalised face-to-face approach. And somebody else may want it over the telephone or a Teams-like appointment. So, yeah, I think it's recognising that everyone's different and everyone has different ways in which they want to engage. But looking at your workforce support programs and understanding what options have you got, and if you've got gaps, then maybe look at plugging those.
Brilliant. So it's a case of really making the workforce aware of what support and help might be out there.
And
the different
not good
ways.
enough to sort of just put it in your work onboarding pack or something, or you might have a poster in the staff room, but that's not really going to do it. I think having a focus on well-being all of the time, and perhaps in your team meetings, we recently ran a session last month actually as part of our team meeting where we invited in our healthcare providers, and they just reiterated again. So we've got staff members that have been with us 10, 12 or more years, but we still ask them to come along because those benefits are improving, and changing all the time. So I think, raising the awareness and also just making it okay, to reach out and engage with these programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so what can employers do in terms of looking and recognising signs that employees might be struggling and to maybe give somebody a supportive nudge towards some support?
So I think the best thing that I've experienced in this space is probably the mental health first aiders program, which if you haven't been on it, I think it's definitely worthwhile looking at. It takes, in my experience, it was about a 2-day course. It isn't going to make you a psychotherapist or anything like that, but what it does do is it helps you identify early signs when people might not be okay. They might not have recognized it themselves, but changes in behavior, things like lack of engagement, or somebody might be more prone to anxiety or stress. That can manifest itself in all sorts of ways. So people feeling overwhelmed, people disengaging from work activities where perhaps they wouldn't before, or even when people go quiet. Sometimes not getting any response from somebody is a sign where they're just not okay.
Yes.
And if you ask them, I think one of the greatest things I was passed on was, if you ask somebody if they're okay and they say yes, and then you ask again, are you really okay?
Yes.
And it can be something as simple as that, where actually the second time you ask, sometimes people really think and go, actually, no.
Because it makes them think rather than just have a reactive answer.
Yeah, well, we're so British, aren't we? I think we do that whole kind of stoic thing where we're always okay. I think if somebody walked into the office with half a leg hanging off, we'd all be rushing around and calling an ambulance. But, we see people displaying signs of anxiety, stress, but nobody actually stops to sort of go out and ask if they're okay. What we sort of tend to do is avoid the problem. We don't talk about it. But I think it's one of the nicest things you can do for somebody in the workplace is to actually show that you care and take a moment to see if they really are okay, instead of just dumping a whole load more work on them.
Absolutely.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Although the funny thing is, there is something about the British culture that if we did walk into the office or hop into the office with half a leg hanging off, we'd still go, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
I have a spare.
And there is something about this. We are so stoic about how we're feeling. And to take your point about asking people twice, I'm also one for asking people in general, because I think you can't notice when somebody isn't doing well if you haven't really had the chance to notice them or haven't bothered to notice them in the first instance.
When they are fine.
When they are fine, yeah, exactly. So I think you made some really interesting points there. Rob is staying with us and we're going to be back just after this.
And just make a list of all the different things you're doing. And if you can, over kind of 3 weeks, the percentage of your time you're spending on them. What you're really doing there is essentially your own job analysis. You're looking at the tasks that you're doing frequently and how long it's taking you. What you should be able to do then is look at that list and go, what do I actually want to be doing and what do I not want to be doing? Or what could we maybe get in some other help that is maybe doesn't need your experience at this point to come in and the tasks that they can do. So you're almost crafting your perfect job.
Navigating today's workplace is tough.
Toxic employees, endless drama, a lack of motivation. We've all been there.
But fear not, we are here to help. My name is Leanne and I'm a chartered psychologist.
My name is Al and I'm a business owner, and together we dig into the scientific and commercial secrets behind great workplace cultures in Truth, Lies and Work.
A no-nonsense, award-winning psychology podcast brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network. We explore practical strategies for building a great workplace.
We debunk buzzwords and bring you the very best advice around finding and keeping great people. From personality tests.
Personality tests they're mostly bollocks. I don't know what kind of language you do on your podcast. I don't know if people know this, but the man who wrote the Wonder Woman comics is the person who invented the disc.
When more flexible working became a norm, you no longer hurt your career prospects by being the one person who worked flexibly.
All the way to avoiding high turnover.
We recruit and promote people to managerial roles based on their technical skills, not their people skills. This is a very fundamental problem we have, which we haven't directly tackled.
From toxic-free coaches,
Interventions for the individual are only half the answer. Systemic change is the other half.
to sustainable growth.
Thinking beyond just paying somebody a good salary, I think is super necessary now. We have to offer so much more than that.
We have got you covered.
So join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays where we help you to simplify the science of work and build amazing workplace cultures.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. We're here with Rob Stevens from Optix Solutions, and we are talking about the uptake of employee assistance programs, mental health support in the workplace, or rather the lack of uptake, which can be quite worrying, given that, and I've got a few more statistics here, Gen Z or Gen Z, they're choosing to take sick days, which is fine. I actually think taking a mental health day isn't a bad thing sometimes.
Yeah, it takes courage.
Yeah, it does. And it's a good example for the rest of us. But if that sick day is just simply putting a plaster over a bigger problem, then that's not necessarily the best solution. And whilst it may be problematic to dig deep, or it might be painful to dig deep, we might need to do that. So how do you remain understanding that that's their way of coping, but also encourage them to maybe go to that harder place to really uncover the root?
So I think, everybody's going to be different in how they want to handle this. And for me personally, I've been very open over the last few years about my own journey with mental health. And, I had a full-blown breakdown and crisis in my early to sort of mid-20s where, I ended up completely, effectively unemployable, total breakdown, almost a year out. Suicidal probably for a good 6 months of that, and ultimately because I left things too late, ended up homeless as well. So there's a real sort of cautionary tale to tell about ignoring those early signs. And had I have not said I was okay, had I been honest with my friends and family about how severe the struggles were, then perhaps it wouldn't have got to the point it did, where I lost my job, my home, my relationship broke down. I couldn't have got any lower really, other than perhaps not being here anymore. So I try and sort of warn people that, that they don't want to get to that position, because it can happen really quickly. Once things sort of slip, and once you've no longer got control, if you can't trust your own mind, things can escalate so fast. So, once I did finally get into a professional support program via my GP, I had some medication sort of assistance to sort of balance me out. But ultimately it was still, 6 months past that point to sort of be able to enter the workplace again and actually start trying to rebuild my life. And then it's taken me, almost 30 years to try and build back what I lost. But, I've been able to sort of come through that, whereas I appreciate not everyone can. So for me personally, that's my story. That's why I would sort of, take a moment to try and really help the individuals understand the severity of ignoring those early signs, and hope that they do engage with. I mean, I've even gone as far as to sit down with people in a room and actually ring the employee assistance program for them, and then once the phone's ringing and we've got the sort of therapist on the other line, I dip out of the room and let them get on with it. But sometimes people really need you to help them take that first step. It's up to them. Each person has to then go on their own journey, but ultimately, I think if somebody's not going to take the right course of action, or if somebody's not going to engage with a professional, then I think we should try and do what we can to sort of point them into the right direction. But at the same time, the old saying goes, you can take a horse to water, right? But sometimes it just needs that one person to show that random act of kindness that can hopefully then prevent you from having a full sort of breakdown like I did. So anyway, that's my story.
I think that's an important part of the puzzle, though, actually, because your own sharing of that experience and what worked for you, what didn't work for you, what you were going through at the time, that transparency. In another report, they're saying that young people in the workforce, they are craving transparency and unfiltered conversation, because everything on social media is so filtered and so false, and you don't know what's what. So I think what you're doing is really, really important. How do we encourage organizations to recognize that transparency, that honesty is actually going to make better connections with anyone across the board?
Yeah, I think, for me, being a business owner, I'm ultimately interested in the health and the well-being of all my team, because I know that's what drives performance, and then the performance puts us into profit, right? So if you want to just get down to the hard financials of it, then ultimately the well-being and the not just physical well-being, but also mental well-being of your workforce directly impacts your profitability. And there's so many studies and data on this as well, right? So I'm sure we could all Google it if we want to, but it's actually astounding. You can see huge uplifts from, it depends on which piece of data you pull, but it's typically anywhere between 15 and sort of 30 or high 30, nearly 40% increase in profitability by maintaining, a healthy workforce and mental well-being. So I think, from a business owner perspective, there's that angle. Absolutely, this will pay off for you. But also from the employee's perspective, because ultimately, people will be on a journey and they'll be wanting to sort of either look for promotion or look for pay rises or whatever it might be. And having the kind of mental resilience and wherewithal to be able to go on that journey is important, right? Because everyone knows life's like a wave, and there's going to be peaks and troughs within that. And if you hit one of those troughs when you haven't got the mental resilience, then you can be in that zone for a long time. But at the same time, by accessing professional support, accessing kind of, whether it's through your GP or a workplace wellbeing program, whoever you go to, I think will help you as best they can. And if it's not their speciality, then they'll refer you off. That's what I think. There is a really well-connected mental health program available, particularly in the UK. The biggest challenge we've got is actually walking people into it and getting them started. I think that's the challenge at the moment, because the services are there. It's just that the hardest with anything, like I don't run marathons, but I've been told the hardest thing is starting. That's probably why I haven't run one.
Probably why a lot of us haven't.
Yeah, it's the same with the mental health journey. I think the hardest thing is actually, recognizing that you need help, and then the next hardest thing is actually doing something about it.
Absolutely. And do you think part of the issue with Gen Z may be that they don't trust the system enough, so that they don't want to ask for help, or that they won't put up with a system that kind of nods its head?
Pats them on the back, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
So I think that's a really yes and no, right? So I'll try and quantify that answer. So yes, there's a resilience within Gen Z. I can speak from those that I've kind of asked about this. So because they've got so much access to information, it's almost overload. They also, you can go on Google. Dr. Google's great, right? You can go on there, you can self-diagnose, and it will tell you exactly what you need to do. But also, I think on social media, there's so much around sort of mental health and what you can and can't do. But it's almost, like I said, overload, where there's so many kind of conflicting bits of information. And a lot of it's deeply worrying because these people aren't qualified, right? So I think there's a big difference between what you may find on Google or AI or social media versus, how you'll be treated if you go through your local NHS mental health program. I think it's, vastly different. And I think with all these things, particularly when you're talking about your well-being, for me personally, go to the expert, right? Don't put any of this at risk, because your well-being could be further put back, right? If you're going down this wrong route, and you could spend months, if not years, pursuing all sorts of strange quack kind of methodologies, where actually, if you'd have gone through perhaps like a CBT type program with your mental health crisis team, that is normally like a very quick turnaround. But that's just one piece, I guess, of the puzzle.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think yes and no. So yes, the Gen Z are aware, but I think they're a bit lost and stuck. So that's why they're not engaging, because I think they feel like they're aware, they're trying to do something about it, but the resilience to engage with more formal programs, I think perhaps is because they feel that they're already taking a proactive approach, so they don't need it.
Yes, and just a quick extra point. There are mixed messages as well, because when you go to the GP these days, they quite often put it back on you. Well, what do you think you've got? Or how do you want to be treated? So if GPs are kind of putting that back on us, no wonder Gen Z especially, who have all the issues you've just gone through, and then the GP is saying, well, what do you think it is you have? And it's confusing. It's confusing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about with Gen Z as well is, they're still very young, they're still working themselves out, they're still trying to understand how the world operates. But, they've been through how many global crises? There's wars going on, we've had God knows how many recessions. And it's the only thing that's kind of been consistent is that it's been completely inconsistent. The world's been crazy over the last 5 years. And trying to kind of make your way through that, when you're, 18 or into your early 20s is, it's incredible, right? It's hard for anyone. I think that, and also because of all the fake news that's flying around, when you are perhaps a bit older and you've seen a few things, you can kind of look at something and you go, that's just not right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, whereas if you haven't got that kind of worldly experience, then I think you can see things on social media particularly and take them at face value and think, well, that person's got 5 million followers. They must be, somebody must be regulating this, right? They can't just say, I don't know, I was going to make something completely random up, but, suddenly raspberries are going to cure your mental health. And so we all go off eating raspberries, and then actually turns out it's got nothing at all linked to it whatsoever. But just because somebody with 5 million followers said it on YouTube or something, then we all think that's great. It's just, a lot of it's just complete nonsense.
Yeah, and that is a stark warning to bear in mind. Rob is staying with us. We'll be back just after this. A world without the arts is one without confidence, creativity and community, and yet funding has been reduced every year. Arts programmes have been shown to benefit social inclusion and well-being, particularly for marginalised groups, with projects fostering a sense of belonging, cultivating mutual understanding and breaking down social barriers and isolation. Participation in arts programmes can help boost confidence and open doors to opportunities that may otherwise be inaccessible. Click Arts Foundation offers grants up to £2,000 for grassroots arts projects twice a year, with our community arts experience trustees meticulously scoring each project on impact and sustainability. To date, we have supported craft and visual arts projects, dance, drumming for well-being, and preservation of heritage and culture. If you share our passion, not just for maintaining the arts themselves, but contributing to the many benefits it can bring, please consider making a donation to Click Arts Foundation registered charity.
Hi there, I'm Dawn Livingston, your host on the Transcend and Succeed show. Join me Fridays at 2 p.m. Central for limitless inspiration and ways to help you transcend your limitations. Tune into the Achieve TV network and the Voyage to Vitality channel. Transcend and Succeed show, right here on A360 TV.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours, where we're talking to Rob Stevens about why people, especially Gen Z and younger people, might not be taking up mental health support where it's offered. It's a really interesting conversation. So we sort of mentioned waiting lists. How do we address long waiting lists, and is there an option for organisations, medical organisations, to link with charities to maybe alleviate those?
Yeah, so this is a challenge now probably greater than it's ever been. So, it would be wrong of me to say that I'm not aware that there are waits out there, because there absolutely are, particularly, if you're trying to access NHS services and also charities. I know charities have, well, it depends who you speak to, but I was talking to 2 charities this week and another last week, and they've got wait lists into, well, quite sadly, into the months now, because funding has been cut across the board. That's from central government, but also donations are declining sort of faster than they've ever seen before. So charities are in a particularly precarious position right now, and they're really struggling with what has been increased demand. So it's interesting that we're not seeing the demand from the Gen Z, but across the whole population, there is. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but there's been I was going to call it an explosion, but I can't think of a better word. But there's been a significant increase in demand for mental health services across the whole population in the UK. However, if you are in the workplace and you have a private policy, which might be the form of insurance or it might be private medical, then. So I had this conversation with a couple of Gen Zs in my business, right? And they were saying, oh, well, there's going to be queues and waits and this and then. By the time I get through, I've probably figured it out, or I've gone online and found something, and I look after my meditation, and I'll go for a walk or whatever it might, and that's all great, right? However, what I said was, look, have you actually rung the line? And they were like, no. And I said, right. The thing is, like, if you ring it, it's open 24/7, 365, and you get an instant therapist on the phone, and they will kind of triage you with an initial conversation. And depending on the severity of the situation, they will either look to help you resolve it there and then, or it could be that they have to triage you to maybe a psychotherapist or whoever. But that person will then normally call you back within about 15 minutes. Right, so not 15 days or weeks or months, and that's the difference, or I guess the benefit of a private support service versus having to kind of stand in line. And the other thing to do is, if you speak to your GP and you mention the magic words that you have private medical cover, then all of a sudden you'll find your GP suddenly says,
interesting.
Right, actually, yes, no problem. We can send you straight with a referral to a consultant, and they'll see you. Yes. And then guess what? You get your letter from the GP, and what can happen then is, you'll probably get to see a consultant within the next couple of days, right? So there might be a 2-year wait list for everyone else on the NHS, but if you've got private medical cover, again, talking from personal experience, I know, when I uttered those magic words to the GP, I was in to see a consultant within 48 hours, and the consultant is saying, right, when can you come down, Mr. Stevens? And I said, well, I don't know. When are you available? And they said, well, any time you like. You just tell us. And I was like, oh, it's completely different. Yeah. But even though a lot of employees will have private medical, they don't actually know how to engage with it and how to use it, or what the benefits are. And I think it's really important to kind of have a look at these schemes, because, we've heard of people who've been sat for months, even in, embarrassingly, my own organisation, waiting for, say, a scan or something. And we were like, why are you waiting? Like, all scans are covered, right? So just tell your GP, and then they're like, oh, right. And the same thing, literally within days, they've jumped straight to the front of the queue and they're in. So, but it's the same with mental health as it is with physical health.
That's so important. Before we move on to your top tips, I'm just going to sneak in a question here, just about the types of problems that Gen Z are experiencing compared to us, for example. We tend to be a bit stiff upper lip. We tend to be rescuers. We tend to be, either we roll over and take it, or we kind of just go, I can deal with it. It's not that bad. Either way, it's not that healthy. Do you think Gen Z is experiencing this juxtaposition between the people they're reaching out for help, saying, oh, get over it, or in my day, we never, or do you think there's completely different issues that we're not really understanding?
A bit of both. I think a lot of the Gen Zs will have seen their parents or family members with the stoicism and the stiff upper lip. There's clearly a problem, but they're not doing something about it, and that manifests itself, I guess, in so many families and situations and friend groups across the UK. But this group, the Gen Zs, are the first ones who are sort of talking openly. So that's a step forward, right? That's good. Okay. But I think they need support and some help, when they do so. And if they're taking a day off for their mental health, and, we've had that happen in our organisation where people have said, look, I'm just not good. And they don't need to explain why, and that's okay. They don't have to justify it to me. You're not here, you're not well, good, well done. Well, but I think the next step is, well, how can we help? As opposed to, I haven't had a day off in 50 years. It's like, well, that's, okay. But nobody's going to get a medal for that, are they?
No.
It's true. You're not winning any competitions there. So I think it's about setting the right landscape, but when somebody's brave enough to sort of raise a flag like that, to say, look, I'm actually not okay, it's about seeing what we can do to help and support them, and to make changes, that are reasonable within the workplace. So this whole snowflake generation, for me, it's a total, it's just offensive, right? Yes, and anyone who kind of like goes along with that is part of the problem. So I think we do want people to be more open. We do want people to engage with mental health services in the right way. But I think, again, it comes back to, the older generation, taking their own medicine as well. So, there's no point sort of stomping around saying how stressed you are and, God, the world's on your shoulders and no one understands. And, that displaying those kind of behaviours is not going to sort of encourage your younger sort of team members or family members to sort of take that positive step and actually engage with professional support.
No, it's absolutely right. We need to set an example that, we need to go and find our own solutions. So what would be your 3 top tips for having a mental health conversation at work?
I think, at work, a lot of these things need to be handled, at the individual's discretion, right? And so, some people may be quite comfortable talking about it in the team. And for other people, they would probably prefer to be under a rock anywhere else but right now talking to you about the mental health. So, and everyone's in between those sort of positions. So I think, personalisation is the right way forward. Understanding on what terms does that individual want to engage, but also sort of being persistent in that, this does need to be talked about. We talked before, didn't we, about asking once, then ask twice. Yeah. But also, letting people have the access information, how can they engage with if it is a workplace support program, making sure that they've got the email, making sure they've got the telephone number. And there's been situations where I think I've sent that piece of information and I know they've got it, right? But this is like the 5th and the 6th and the 7th or maybe the 8th time. And then, and I keep saying, have you rung? No, you haven't. Okay. Well, look, you mentioned this a few months ago. You came to me a couple of weeks ago. Perhaps, maybe this time, perhaps, I don't know. It's up to you. But saying, so I think part of it is that, and sometimes, like I said, you do need to give people a nudge. But with other people, you might find you pass it over once and off they go. But everyone that I think we've talked to who's activated the employee support program, has got nothing but positives to say. So we try and use those hero stories. So that would be my next tip, I guess, is to sort of spread the word and use advocates within your organisation to talk to people openly, if they're willing to do that, and some people might not be, but, we found that most people we've asked actually, they're not going to go into the details of why they've called, but what we're talking about is share the experience of what it was like when you actually rang. Did you have to wait for ages or days, or were you straight through? What was the person like when you actually spoke to them? You said, oh, well, they were really empathetic. I didn't know them. They were completely discreet, but, they gave me these great tips. You think, wonderful, let's share those stories. So it's all around kind of training and education, but it's about setting the landscape, I think, as well, and making sure that the environment is an open one. And I think check yourselves as well. So we've had, times where, we have to roll our sleeves up, right? We're in a very busy industry. It can be stressful. It can be quite crazy at times, but recognise that, and that is part of it, right? And everyone's got different tolerances for those situations at different times. Sometimes I can roll into that situation and be like, great, bring it on. And then the next time you're like, oh no, just not today. But be open about it, right? And say, look, I haven't got the appetite for this right now. They're like, is there someone who can support you and help you kind of bear that burden for that, instead of just piling more pressure on yourself or on other people?
I think there's definitely something to be said for being very open and honest. We are having to go into the break now, but before we do that, where can we learn a bit more about you, Rob?
Oh, I'm online, so either LinkedIn, Robert Stevens, the website, www.optixsolutions.co.uk. I should be easy to find, so yeah, just have a look online.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be back just after this. Today's business boost is going to cover some of the top well-being trends, and this is according to Forbes. So number one, financial wellness. That's one of the key things that organizations are looking at the moment. In 2023, a Morgan Stanley study found that 66% of US workers reported financial stress, and that was affecting their job performance. So companies can support employees by offering personalized financial coaching, and that's the top one. Number two, personalized and proactive wellness. So that's something which, of course, our guest Rob Stevens has talked about. We know that one-size-fits-all wellness programs are archaic and inefficient. And so, according to Forbes, today's employees have diverse needs ranging from stress management, weight management, nutritional concerns, mental health concerns, all of those things. They range through so many parts of your life. And actually, what Forbes says is thanks to AI and machine learning, employers can now tailor solutions when it comes to taking a personalized approach to wellness. Another interesting one, part three or number three, is workplace design. I really like this one. Subtle changes, improving air quality, optimizing lighting, adding biophilic touches such as plants and greenery. That can significantly impact stress levels. Number four is one that we talk about on the show a lot, and we're very happy to see this coming into the workplace a lot more, and that is menopause support. Menopause support is very, very important because at any given time, around 20% of the workforce is experiencing some stage of menopause. And yet women are still feeling the need to conceal their symptoms. Therefore, access to menopause-specific professionals, as well as flexible working arrangements and tailored medical insurance, can make a huge difference. And finally, expanded family care. This one really struck me as very interesting as well, because with 3 in 4 employees balancing caregiving responsibilities, and with the population of 65 and over, not only being quite large but set to grow, caregiving is becoming a silent pandemic, according to Forbes. And caregiving responsibilities are not just children, it can be aging parents or relatives as well. So what Forbes concludes is wellness is no longer optional for the workforce in 2025. It is a strategic business necessity. Welcome back to the last part of Mental Health Matters Office Hours. Another really interesting conversation, probably hammering home the point that we all know but we don't talk about enough. This one-size-fits-all thing isn't working. No, actually, and when you look at it generationally, then of course, you know, you do generalise, yes. But there is something to be said. You know, different generations do deal with different conditions or things going on in their life in different ways. Age difference, yeah. But cultural differences. Yeah, of course. The more we have a diverse workplace, the better the workplace is going to be, because we learn from each other. But we also bring in baggage from those different cultures and the expectation. If you get it right for a community, I bet you'll get it right for other people as well who are too afraid to say. Well, exactly, and it comes back to having in the workplace the culture to provide support and make everyone, no matter what age or culture or, you know, background they might have, feel safe enough to ask for that support. And that's kind of the basic thing that everyone should aspire to, having a workplace that offers that. Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it comes back to something else I've talked about on previous shows. If you have your basic needs met, you are more likely to improve and be able to do all the other stuff. Yeah. What are you taking away from today's show? I mean, there's so much that he talks about. There's so much. I think there's two. One is we talk about, like, are we Gen X? We talk about the different, we're Gen X. We're Gen X. There's boomers, our parents, and then there's millennials. Gen Y, which I didn't know about. Yeah, millennials. Gen Z, and it's easy for us to say, well, in our day, but we don't experience, we went through COVID. Yes, we did. We're experiencing the fallout of different wars and things, but we experience them in different ways. Yes, we do. And I think the big takeaway for me is that
we don't know how different generations are experiencing, really, because we're not in those generations.
Yes.
So I think we need to be a little bit more understanding.
And for me, it was Rob saying, as a leader, you need to try those as employee assistance programs yourself.
Yeah.
Because if they're there and you're not using them, is there a reason why you're not using them? And if there is, why on earth are you expecting anyone in your team to use them? And there is something, well, research from the University of Zurich has found that it's the leader's own, I've done this and this works for me, that encourages other people to do it. So there is something in that. And I remember I had a session I was delivering, and again the leader said to me, but they're not using, we've got all of this stuff, we've got all of this employee assistance, mental health course, all of that. I said, Warwick, do you use it? No.
Maybe that's why.
And there we go. And then you can probe even further to why aren't you using it? And admittedly, sometimes it's I don't have the time, but it's kind of like, well then surely this must be working in the same way for your team as well. Whatever your reasons are valid, they're going to be valid for your team. Therefore, maybe your employee assistance program needs to be a bit more flexible or cover different things.
Yes.
It's the same thing as having yoga Fridays, which might work for some places, but other places they might just want reduced gym membership.
Well, exactly. And it's tailoring to the needs of your employees.
So, if you have put in a great program that is working well, we would love to hear from you. So please let us know in the comments. And otherwise, from Judith and I, have a healthy week.